So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in Surah Al-Anfal about the concept that we discussed briefly when we were going through the seerah, when we were discussing Ghazwat Badr. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in verses 7 and 8 of Surah Al-Anfal, وَإِذْ يَعِدُكُمُ اللَّهُ إِحْدَى الطَّائِفَتَيْنِ أَنَّهَا لَكُمْ وَتَوَدُّونَ أَنَّ غَيْرَ ذَاتِ الشَّوْكَةِ تَكُونُ لَكُمْ وَيُرِيدُ اللَّهُ أَن يُحِقَّ الْحَقَّ بِكَلِمَاتِهِ وَيَقْطَعَ دَابِرَ الْكَافِرِينَ لِيُحِقَّ الْحَقَّ وَيُبْطِلَ الْبَاطِلَ وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْمُجْرِمُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about Ghazwat Badr and gives the setup of Ghazwat Badr, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the believers that Allah was giving them the glad tidings of two choices. Either they are going to get the caravan that Abu Sufyan was leading and basically win all the bounties in the caravan, or they're going to face the non-believers in a battle. And of course, the companions not wanting to fight, because again, fighting is not something that naturally people want to do. They wanted to get the caravan, get the bounties without a fight. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains to us this very important fundamental concept in Islam, that we will be faced in a lot of situations by two choices, and one choice of them would be closer to our heart, and we would think that this is the better choice for us. But Allah explains to us that a lot of times Allah has a master plan that we cannot even comprehend or understand, and the other choice would be actually the better one. So in Ghazwat Badr, the companions wanted to get the bounties of the caravan, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains in the Quran that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had a different plan. Allah wanted them to fight so that truth can prevail. Now, the reason I'm talking about that specific concept is one that applies to our day-to-day life. As we go through life, a lot of things happen to us where we look back and we say, why did this happen? I wish I had this job. I wish this person wasn't sick. I wish we keep wishing things. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that as Muslims, fundamentally, we need to understand that yes, we might want some stuff, but Allah has a master plan. And our role is twofold. Our role, first and foremost, is to have our heart connected with Allah's plan subhanahu wa ta'ala. That we understand and be comfortable and content with whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed. And then two, that we make the utmost best through our actions, that we try to strive to achieve what seems to be good for us. Now, the reason I'm talking about it is the US elections. Because I've seen a lot of people, and we always have to talk about what's happening throughout our life here. We cannot just ignore elections or ignore stuff because it's too political. We don't want to talk about it in the masjid. We need to be upfront as Muslims and talk about stuff. A lot of people in the previous election wanted Joe Biden to win. A lot of Muslims. A lot of them. Because for them, like, Trump was a disaster. And they went and voted for Joe Biden. But who would have thought that this person would be the main supporter of the genocide? That we're just making dua for Allah to basically end this genocide. The main supporter of this genocide is the current president of the United States that is financing it. And a lot of people voted for him. Now when we have Trump as the president-elect, we're seeing a lot of Muslims again being very worried about a Trump presidency, and rightly so. But of course they didn't want the other person because she's also aiding the genocide. So the real reason and the real moral here is that one, we need to understand whichever choice we want our heart to be connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we want to know that as Muslims, we need to continue to perform our duty regardless of who is in office and regardless what we think about the person in office. And we need to take all the means possible to actually try to achieve something that is useful to Muslims and Islam. When you look at the last election, regardless of who would have won, because both candidates were not favorable for Muslims to start with. But to be honest, it was a very big disappointment because a lot of leaders of the Muslim community throughout the United States were advocating that people vote for a third party. And when you look the percent of votes that third party candidate received was barely 1% of the vote. So either that we're non-existent, and we're really less than 1% of the population of the United States, or we're still divided among ourselves. And these are some of the things we need to contemplate on. Because when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses, and when we see that we get a president like President Trump, we need to think again about ourselves. What does this say about ourselves? What does this say about our choices? Have we actually achieved anything through the last election? Have we done anything useful for Muslims through the last election? We didn't support either of the candidates. We could not even put a position that we're going to support a third-party candidate. If that was our position, it was a huge failure. Barely 1% of the votes went to that candidate that the big leaders were advocating for. So again, we need to look at ourselves because it shows our weakness. It shows first and foremost that if we continue down that path, we're going to continue to get the same result, which basically is an election where both sides have no respect for Muslims. Both candidates have no respect for Muslims. And we cannot blame them. We can only blame ourselves. Because we're not united, we're not clear on what we're standing for, we're not clear on what we're advocating for, we're not even clear on what we want, and then we expect them to be good to us. That's not how the game is played. So again, we need to make sure that as things happen in our life, we take lessons and we reflect. But two things we need to take. One is our hearts need to be always connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, regardless what happens, regardless what choices go on. But second, we need to be critical, to actually look at our actions and try to start to think of how we can change them so that we start to have some influence in the world that we live in. Because as Muslims, we want to make sure that we are influential in the world that we live in. Not because we want the power, not because we want people to say we're influential, but because we want La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah to prevail. And we want to protect it. And we want to make sure that our kids and our grandkids and our progeny has room to worship in this country and has the same rights like every other individual in this country. So again, we should, as we go through the elections, not just ignore them or claim victories that have never actually happened or just do whatever rationalization we do. We should be very critical among ourselves, and we should make sure, one, that our heart is connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala regardless who's occupying the White House, but two, that we look at our actions and say, what have we achieved? And why haven't we achieved anything? And why are we still divided? A genocide happening, and the Muslim community could not unify their voice behind a specific choice. SubhanAllah, what will unify us? What more signs do we need from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to unify as an ummah and as a population in the United States and as a population in Irvine? So a lot of lessons for us to learn, and we absolutely need to be self-critical before others are critical about us. Because again, we have seen an election that is an embarrassment where we have the two candidates totally disrespecting the Muslim community, and on top of that we have a Muslim community that is divided and could not even make a statement of any kind through that election. That only shows our weakness, our attachment to this life. This is the wahan that the Prophet ﷺ was talking about, which is hubb ad-dunya wa karahiyat al-maut. That we love this life, we clinch to it, but without really being thoughtful and critical about anything, and we hate the hereafter because we're not being strategic and thinking about what matters. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to show us the right path, make us steadfast on the right path, make us strategic in our actions, unite our community, make us make actions that please Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to ensure that our progeny and our kids and grandkids have a place to worship wherever they are in this world. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us blessings and forgive our sins and forgive our weakness and forgive our shortcomings. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to heal the sick people in our community and our families, and to have mercy on people that have passed away. اللهم اغفر لنا ذنوبنا وإسرافنا في أمرنا وثبت أقدامنا وانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما. ربنا اغفر لنا ولإخواننا الذين سبقونا بالإيمان ولا تجعل في قلوبنا غلا للذين آمنوا ربنا إنك رؤوف رحيم. اللهم انصر إخواننا المستضعفين في فلسطين. اللهم انصر إخواننا المستضعفين في لبنان. اللهم انصر إخواننا المستضعفين في شتى بقاع الأرض يا رب العالمين. اللهم واعذرنا فيهم يا أرحم الراحمين. واغفر لنا ذنوبنا وإسرافنا في أمرنا وثبت أقدامنا وانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. اللهم إنا نسألك من خير ما سألك منه نبيك محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم ونعوذ بك من شر ما استعاذك منه نبيك محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم.